千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. As everyone may recall from last time, we talked about the chapter title, 用兵章. It is the military strategy chapter, the chapter where Lao Tzu uses military strategy to talk about life strategy. And last time we were able to draw parallels between the two. What applies to the military can apply to life. Here's what the chapter looks like. A relatively short chapter, 12 lines, and we were able to do a quick analysis to see how the lines are divided up. And our conclusion was the following. We were able to divide up the chapter into 3 sections. The first section, the introductory section, starts out with the military saying. In using the military, we have a saying and then 2 lines to talk about those sayings. Then, in section 2, in the second section, Lao Tzu goes into specific details, clarifications on what the saying actually means, how they apply to the general or to the military commander. So we were able to cover these 2 sections last time. The third section that we will get into today is the concluding section, and it's going to draw conclusions, eventually arriving at a very important line, line 12, the last line, that says, the side that is compassionate shall win. That actually has many implications about life in general. So we'll talk about that in great detail. For now, in the first 2 sections, let's review and recap the most important concepts that we went over together. The first major concept we discussed was about being the guest. This comes from the second line of this chapter, as you can see in the recap slide here. The second line says, I dare not be the host, but prefer to be the guest. So being the guest is the most important concept, and we went into a discussion on what that expression actually means. Here, Lao Tzu is basically saying that in military engagement, as well as daily life, it is better to be cautious. It is better to be like the polite guest, the visitor, rather than the busy host who is busy initiating activities. How does this apply to us? As you can see in this slide, it means that when we have a contentious situation, perhaps we're fighting our own battles, perhaps it's an argument or something that a discussion that is heated and about to become an argument. In anything that is contentious, from all-out war to personal battles, do not be the one to attack first. So that is actually good advice for us in modern times. As I mentioned previously, if you attack first, you can be you can be charged with assault. If you react to the attack, you are acting in self-defense. And it's not just fights or contentious situations. In everyday, non-contentious situations, Lao Tzu is basically saying, do not rush into anything blindly. So the guest is the one that's taking the initiative to do this and that. Lao Tzu says, in everyday situations, you want to see what's going on and then react to that appropriately. So you can do everything with clarity, know what you're getting into. When you communicate with other people, this applies too. Rather than to rush in with your own ideas and thoughts, it is far better, according to Lao Tzu and the Tao philosophy, to understand what the other person is at. Seek first to understand before expressing yourself. So in general, in life, no matter what it is, the idea is to see what's ahead of you before taking your step. And in the West, we have similar expressions of wisdom to look before you leap. Now, in this chapter, there's going to be a lot of discussions on dual concepts, complementary dualities, the yin and yang. So the counteractive expression in the West to look before you leap is another saying commonly heard that says, he who hesitates is lost. So I think we get the idea that the best way to go about it is to strike the right balance between forging forward, going full speed ahead, and looking before leaping so you know what you are getting into. And Lao Tzu, without a doubt, is favoring the latter, not the former, favoring caution and clarity, going into anything with your eyes wide open. So what we did was that we presented various life situations, various aspects of life in a table in order to illustrate the same idea. This definitely shows how the same principle has many practical applications, not just on the battlefield. The concept itself is about not making the first move, observe and make the most appropriate counter move. In warfare, this means you let the enemy expend its energy, reveal itself. What are they going to do? How will they attack? Look for weaknesses that are exposed and that can be exploited. So that's warfare. That's the battlefield. It applies to personal combat as well. In martial arts, for those who study, you definitely come across the concept that you want to be ready for an attack so you can block or evade and then deal a devastating counter strike. And so it's better to not be the first one to strike, but to be the first one to counter strike. Then, aside from fights, whether it's on the battlefield or in the boxing ring, there are contentious situations in daily life. So then the idea is to not be the aggressor, that you want to instead be the observer, to watch for the aggression initiated by others, and then figure out the best way to diffuse an explosive situation. So not just contentions, but just in daily interactions with other people, it is important to not jump to conclusions, but to understand what's going on before taking action or saying something. Then lastly, in communication, to never assume. Listen to what the other person has to say before offering your thoughts and opinions. And I also want to add that not being the host, preferring to be the guest, and also preferring to withdraw rather than to advance, when you apply that to communication, it's actually addressing one of the things that I see very often in life, and that is some people have a great need to cut other people off, to interrupt mid-sentence, to not let you finish saying what you wanted to say, but cut you off with something that they want to say. So for a Tao cultivator, being the polite guest instead of the host, this would be a no-no. This would be something to avoid. Next, again, continuing with our recap, we used illustrations to highlight the difference between the attacker and the defender. And this is having to do with the advancing and withdrawing. So the host is the attacker. The host maps to the action of advancing. The guest maps to the role of a defender and the action of withdrawing. So what Laozi is pointing out here is that if you are the attacker, if you are the army that is attacking a fortress, you are exposed out in the open, whereas the fortress, the defenders are behind protective cover. The attacking army must expend energy, move to attacking position to mobilize in order to do that. Whereas the defenders are waiting for the incoming attacks, rested, and ready to defend. So the attackers are, by the nature of taking the initiative, are revealing their strengths and weaknesses, whereas the defenders have the ability to observe and then figure out what to do, what best to do. Lastly, the last distinction between the two is that think of the attackers as conscripted soldiers ordered to invade. This is a different level of motivation than the defenders, because the defenders are motivated soldiers protecting their homes. So there's definitely a difference in the mentality between the two sides. The side with compassion is going to win, and that's the side that's motivated to protect. It is very difficult to attack and take a fortress. In military history, it is generally accepted that you need a far superior force in order to do that. To take a well-defended target, the defender can have a much smaller force and still be able to successfully repel an attack. So then the last part of our recap has to do with Laozi clarifying what he's talking about and extending the saying into 4 different ideas for clarification. And the first of the ideas was to march without formation. And it is important for us to understand that formation, marching formation, in this context, is referring to having a plan, having a plan of knowing what to do. So in war, the highest level of the commanding general is to be able to deploy troops without rigidity, that the troops are well trained, disciplined, and can be very flexible, reacting to changing conditions. In life, it is the same way. You want to be the skillful general. You want to plan out all of your maneuvers and deployment, your strategies, contingencies. When you have those plans in place, you can afford to be flexible and fluid in reacting to changing situations. Laozi also talks about raising arms without arms, and this is about making things happen without seeming to take a whole lot of actions. For the general, it is saying that the tactics are subtle and unseen, unnoticed by the enemy. When there is a plan, what you do can be very effective. It can be minimal and yet achieve your objectives. We want to emulate that wisdom in life to get things done, and done in a way that is positive rather than negative. So one thing is minimal actions, as I mentioned, and another is to do it in a positive way, to win the battle without resorting to the negative. To win friends over without having to fight anyone, that will be the ideal. Then next we have grapple with the enemy, but without enemies. This is a high level of strategic wisdom where the general is able to affect enemy movements to grapple with them without actually engaging them. And this can be a feint. This can be an action that misleads the enemy to move to a certain position while you are actually intending on attacking something else. In life, this is talking about exerting influence on other people, affecting them without actually engaging with them in battle. You want to positively enlist them to your cause so they're doing what you would like them to do. They are, in that case, no longer enemies. So this is yet another reiteration. It's similar to the second one, to raise arms without arms. There's a huge emphasis in the Tao about fighting without fighting, to win people over so they become your friends. You don't have to fight your friends. And the last one is similar, to hold weapons without weapons. And for the military commander, the action is backed by force. Sometimes the force that is ready to be deployed is sufficient, and there's no actual violence necessary. You don't actually need to use the weapon. So holding the weapon is to have the force at the ready without weapons, without actually using the weapon to attack. And in life, this is all going back to the same idea, to win without firing a shot. That is, by acting from compassion, you are acting in everyone's best interest. You don't need weapons. Your compassion, your reaching out a friendly hand, that can be the most powerful weapon of all. And I know that when we think about the enemies or the challenges we have in life, that sometimes this is a lot easier said than done. So what I hope to do today is to further illustrate with more in-depth analysis so you can see how to apply this in your life. So now it is time for us to get back into the Tao Te Ching chapter 69. We're done with the first two sections, which took us from line 1 all the way to line 8. We're now ready to get into line 9. Line 9 says, there is no greater disaster than to underestimate the enemy. So the first thing I want to do is to break down this line into characters to show you what the characters individually mean, and then string them together to talk about what they mean together as a sentence. So literally, the very first character is disaster. The second character is the negation character, similar to bu. So it just means no or not or none. Then we have the character da, which means big, vast, huge, great, grand. And then we have than as the fourth character there. And then we have the character for light, like lightweight. And then the last character is enemy. So to light enemy, well, the character in Chinese does not have the meaning of lighting a fire like we do in English. When we say light together with enemy, you are making light of the situation when you are confronting the enemy, that you are regarding the enemy lightly, that you take them lightly, you're not taking them seriously. You're not assigning the appropriate weight to them. This is just an expression to say, underestimate the enemy. So to regard the enemy lightly is to underestimate the enemy. 轻敌 in Mandarin. So in war, Lao Tzu points out underestimating the enemy leads to disastrous defeat. And he is using that, extending that, mapping it to life to say that in life, underestimating a challenge leads to disastrous failure, which is a personal defeat. So that's what that line is. No greater disaster than to underestimate the enemy in our lives. It means when we underestimate the challenge in life, you're asking for trouble. Okay, so Lao Tzu says when he underestimated the enemy, that it almost cost him his treasures. The line 10 says, underestimating the enemy almost made me lose my treasures. So let's break down this line in terms of characters. We see the exact same character that we did before in line 9. The first character still means light, like lightweight, but now you know it means to treat lightly, to regard lightly, to not take something seriously. The second character still means the same as it did in the previous line, means the enemy. So quote unquote light enemy doesn't make sense in English. It just means to regard the enemy lightly, and that will make sense in English. Then we have the character for almost, and then we have the character for lose, and then the last two characters, my treasures. Treasures, in this case, refers to the 3 treasures from a previous chapter that we studied, chapter 67. And those 3 treasures were compassion, conservation, and not daring to be ahead in the world. Those 3 treasures, and I hope everyone still has a good recollection of our discussion on the 3 treasures. Now, I want to take a moment to invite everyone to think about how it can be. That is, how exactly do you lose the 3 treasures when you underestimate the enemy? What does that process look like? The cause and effect is what I'm most interested in exploring. Cause, starting out with underestimating the enemy, and then what? Leading to the loss of the treasures. So here's what I would suggest as one way to think about it. First, to underestimate the enemy, well, all by itself, that is a sign of arrogance. When it is a sign of arrogance, that automatically implies a loss of humility. So that's one of the treasures being lost. The third and last treasure from that previous chapter was not daring to be ahead in the world. That was another way to talk about the virtue of humility. When you are becoming arrogant, you've lost that. So that's the first treasure to be lost. It's the third treasure. Then, because you underestimated the enemy, you were arrogant about it, it was something that led to you wasting your valuable resources. And that could include time and energy on the battlefield. Resources could be soldiers, weapons, ammunition, supplies, all of that. So when it leads to waste, waste is a loss of the second treasure, the treasure of conservation. So the second treasure has often also been talked about as being economical or being optimal in planning or being thrifty, being frugal. So the idea is that you don't want to waste any resources needlessly. You want to use them to their best advantage. When you are wasting them, you've lost that as a treasure. Then, continuing on, failure and defeat. This is what can lead to frustration and anger, when you are mad about what you have not been able to accomplish, and therefore a bad situation, you are angry with yourself, you are frustrated by what's going on. Anger, in turn, is what disconnects you from your natural compassion, and that is the loss of the first treasure. So now, with this sequence that you see here, you can see exactly what Lao Tzu means when he says, when he underestimated the enemy, he almost lost his treasures. This is how it can happen. Now, what I would like to do is to specifically talk about the process of underestimating the enemy, not only on the battlefield, but also in life, to see how they map from one to the other. This was the intended effect, Lao Tzu wanting to highlight the battlefield to talk about life situations. So in war, suppose what happens when you underestimate the enemy is that you discover the enemy forces are actually larger and better equipped than you first assumed. That can totally happen. Perhaps you acted on bad intelligence. Perhaps you were less than cautious and you did not do a great job allocating resources on your side to be able to counter the enemy forces. And you find that you are woefully inadequate. You don't have enough to handle the army that is facing you. So in life, this is equivalent to underestimating a challenge. When you realize a challenge is much harder than you thought, that you're not prepared for that. You overestimated your abilities. You don't have what you need to complete a particular task or overcome a particular challenge. So that's how we map from war to life. Then what happens? Well, the result of battle is that your forces get wiped out. Your forces are not anywhere close to being able to match the enemy forces due to underestimation. So you have no choice but to retreat or surrender. So this is causing a huge disastrous effect for you. This maps to life when, because you underestimated the challenge, you are forced to miss deadlines, you can get it done in time, you are not able to accomplish your objectives, or you miss deadlines and you turn out suboptimal results, or you're not able to get anything done. So these are all really bad situations. Then lastly, the loss on the battlefield has further consequences. It's not just losing the battle. Losing the war means your kingdom will be invaded, your people will be subjugated, and the kingdom itself will be destroyed. In life, what that means is that having failed at something, it is a possible loss of reputation, and it also undermines your confidence, your belief in yourself. So these are the sequences in the battlefield, on the battlefield, in life, of how the underestimation of the enemy or the challenge leads to negative consequences, defeat, failures, etc. So now let's move on. We have the last two lines to cover, and these are actually important lines. These are important lines that require in-depth explanation. Line 11 says, so when evenly matched armies meet, so let's talk about that for just a moment. Here we're saying that two armies of roughly equal size clash. Which side will win? So this is the way that Lao Tzu is asking, how can one side gain an edge over the other? And if two armies are not exactly equal in size, is it possible that one side can have an edge that will allow them to defeat the larger force? When we map this to life, we find that this means a great challenge you come across in life meets with great determination. your resolve to overcome that particular challenge. So your resolve is your army, your determination, and the challenge is the enemy. So then the question is the same. How can you gain the upper hand over the challenge that you face? If the challenge is just beyond your abilities, what can you do? If you have an edge, is that enough to get you over the top and be able to accomplish what you need? Overcome that challenge. So now I think we're ready for the last line. The last line is the culmination. It is the most important thing in regards to this entire chapter. And this is probably the one line that requires the most explanation of all. Line 12 says, the side that is compassionate shall win. Now, I want to begin by talking about the very first character. That character is I. You may think that it means compassionate, but if you were to look up this character in the dictionary, it actually means sorrow, grief, sadness. And that definition is utilized in that sense elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching. In chapter 31, there is the same character being used. Chapter 31 also talks about war. It is saying that in the aftermath of battle, those who have been killed should be mourned with sadness. So I've got the same character there. I mapped to sadness in the translation, as you can see, highlighted in red. So this character in one definition is meaning sorrow, grief, and sadness. How does that connect to compassion? Why is it translated as compassionate in this chapter, but not compassion in chapter 31? Well, that's where we explore the deeper layers of meaning in this character. So how do we do the connection linguistically from sadness to compassion? Normally, in English, we would not necessarily draw a connecting line between the two. Sadness is sadness, compassion is compassion. They don't seem to be all that close to one another. So here's the idea. Compassion in Mandarin can be written as 慈悲. The two characters that you see here, 慈悲, they make up one way to write about compassion, and this is often used. This is used in modern times frequently. So the two characters, we can break them down. 慈, the first character, it means loving kindness. And a lot of times we can use that character in conjunction with other characters to express similar concepts as compassion. Then the second character, 悲, well, that means sadness, sorrow. It is a synonym. It's synonymous with I, the character for sadness, or we were just looking at. So here, sadness, sorrow, grief is also showing up in an expression that is translated as compassion. Let me explain. Here's what it means. When you possess the true compassion of the Tao, you're not just kind to other people. Kindness is only the surface manifestation of compassion. Another deeper level of compassion is that within your heart, when you have compassion, you can relate to and identify with the troubles that other people are experiencing. So that means when other people suffer, you suffer with them. You can understand how they feel because you have this natural empathy, and you will prefer to save them from that suffering to ease their pain because you are interested in easing your own. You want to make things better all around. You can feel this natural connection that we all have. All human beings are together or connected at a deeper level in the oneness of all humanity. So that connection allows us to empathize with one another. When someone else is suffering, is sad, is going through a bad time, you very naturally want to reach out to help them. When they're sad, you're sad for them. When they're in pain, you are sorry that they are in pain and you want to try to do something about it. Now, 慈悲, the term for compassion, is oftentimes applied to all living things, not just human beings. It can be, for instance, applied to animals, like one's pets, as an example. When you have pets that are frightened, you are empathetic. You are compassionate. You want to ease their fear because they are suffering. They're so scared, right? When your pets are in pain, you want to do something about that to ease their pain, to help them. It is the same source of compassion within you that you feel for your pets as you do for your friends, your family, your loved ones, or even a perfect stranger. So same thing. And in Buddhism, it is even spoken of and taught that the compassion can extend to all animals as well, not just the pets. Animals are cool. Why would you want them to suffer? Why can't the animals live in peace? Why can't they be happy and enjoy life as well? So when you have that level of compassion, you don't want to see any suffering, not among human beings, not with your pets, and not with animals in general. So the broader concept of compassion includes that empathy. And that is where you have the elements of being sad that other living things or humans, people, are suffering. That's the connection. So now let's bring it back to this line. Line 12 says, the side that is compassionate shall win. So now the translation compassionate makes a little bit more sense than before when we're just looking at I being sadness. In war, compassionate warriors are the ones fighting to protect. When you are fighting to protect, you have purpose. You've got something worth fighting for. And the other side of it, the other part that's important about this compassion, this quality of spiritual awareness, this empathy, is that when you understand why you fight, when you understand the purpose, you are far more likely to defeat people who are ordered to fight. So for them, for those soldiers, it's like, why do you fight? Oh, well, because we just got the order. We just got commanded to fight. The general wants us to fight. The commander wants us to fight. So that's very different than those who fight because they know they need to provide protection. They're fighting to protect something that is worth protecting. They understand why they fight. They don't need an order, a command to fight. They will fight by themselves. They're self-motivated, not motivated by other people, not motivated by the chain of command. So another way to say it is that if the two forces are equally matched, those who are defending their homes will be much more motivated to fight than those who have been hired, like mercenaries, and therefore much more likely to defeat them. The hired mercenaries are fighting for money. The defenders are defending their loved ones. Very different levels of motivation and one doesn't match the other. I think that makes sense. Okay, so this is a reiteration of the same concept from previous chapter of the Tao Te Ching, that in chapter 67, toward the end, it says, if one fights compassion, then victory. Here, the term that is used is 慈, and I've highlighted that in red in the Chinese portion of it, and that's translated as compassion. But now you see the connection between 慈悲, and I. So compassion maps to sadness. The character for sadness does have that secondary definition that it can be incorporated as part of one's natural compassion. And this, to be compassionate, a lot of times is mistaken to be a weakness. It is actually not a weakness. It is a strength. Lao Tzu says, rather than a weakness, compassion is essential for eventual victory. So then, here's what I want to draw as a conclusion. Everybody, notice that life is the same way. There are people who, quote unquote, win in life by being ruthless, stepping over other people, right? Winning at the cost of shutting other people down, doing harm to others, stepping over them. Winning ruthlessly isn't truly winning at all. Winning together, everyone winning, is the real victory. So I want to ask everyone to keep that in mind. This is one of the main ideas in chapter 69. Okay, time for us to resume the presentation. So what I would like to do is to dig a little deeper into this concept here. The first two characters that you see in line 12, 哀者, those who are compassionate, those, and if you were to take the previous definition, those who are saddened. And this is something that we can generalize into emotional states. It can be, for instance, those who are angry, those who are grieving, etc. Emotional states. I want to talk about examples of 哀者, those who are sad, but actually referring to those who have the Tao of compassion on their side. So who are they exactly? Here's the deep dive, and this is the last major concept of this chapter. First, the side that has suffered but will not take it anymore. So this is talking about the oppressed, the victimized, the bullied, someone who's been bullied or victimized but refuses to be victimized further. The determination is no more being the victim. And that phrase, no more, derives its power from this principle, similar to the expression, okay, this far, but no further. That's it. I'm putting my foot down, drawing a line in the sand. This is all I'm going to tolerate. I'm going to strike back. I'm going to fight back. So the side that has suffered but will not take it anymore, you can just imagine that in battle, that side is going to have the advantage in morale. And in a similar way, let's take a look at number 2. The side that has been oppressed now rises up against the oppressor. So we're talking about like a revolution, when similar to number 1, people have been oppressed and just won't take any more oppression, rising up, standing up against the oppressor, perhaps a dictator. And the similarity between 1 and 2 is clarity of purpose and motivation. You know exactly why you fight. You know exactly why you have this uprising. And you're going to find that the same idea, the same feeling is very consistent throughout the rest of these examples. So think about number 3, the side that fights for justice. So this is wider, broader than just the ones who have been victimized or oppressed. This is not necessarily the people who have been oppressed, but the people that want to fight for the oppressed, whether they themselves have been oppressed or not. Fighting for justice is to right or wrong, to do what is right. When you can no longer stand by the sideline to watch an atrocity going on, you feel like you finally need to do something about it. Well, that puts you into the same category, the highly motivated side with the extremely high morale. And then number 4, the side that fights for peace rather than conquest. So again, a little bit different than the other ones. You know, the fighting for peace is definitely something that you can combine together with fighting for justice. You know, you want security, peace, justice for all. These are all worthwhile objectives, worthwhile aspirations to fight for a better world rather than conquest. What is conquest? What is it really for? And why wouldn't we rather fight for an ideal? So this is the higher purpose, not for personal material gain, as a matter of principle, also infused with the clarity of purpose. So just think about a comparison when think about fighting over things, fighting over scraps. Okay, well, that's one thing. But what about comparing that to fighting to defend democracy? Suddenly, the energy level is completely different. The feeling is completely different. There's no comparison. When you're talking about fighting to defend democracy, you automatically understand and feel that it is at a higher level than fighting over material things, to squabble over table scraps. And there are expressions that have come about to express this concept from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 69. There is an expression, 哀兵必胜. Let me explain what that is, and I'll break down the characters one by one. It's an alternative way to express the same concept. So the top of this slide, the title says, "The compassionate shall win." So this is talking about the army, the second character there, being the army that fights with the Tao, and the Tao of compassion is represented by the first character, I. Remember, it's grief, it's sorrow, it's sadness, it's compassion. And this is the side, this is the army that will win. Now, there's a complementary expression to go with this. This is where I showcase the two expressions, the dual expression as yin and yang. So I have the yin and yang symbol here in this slide. And to the left, I've got 哀兵必胜. To the right, I have its complement, which is 骄兵必败. Let me explain what they are. The easiest way that I can explain them is to break the characters down so that you can see the meaning of the individual characters, and then you can string them together to get the overall meaning. So to start with the first one, we talked about I, the sadness character that is connected to compassion. Then we talked about being the military force, the army. The third character, be, that means must. And then the last character, 胜, like 胜利, to win, to have victory. Now, notice how in the left expression, the middle two characters are exactly the same as the expression on the right, same two characters. So the difference is the characteristic of the army, that's the first character there, and the results, the outcome, which is the last character. So when you translate literally, it says compassionate army must win. What it really says is that the army that's got compassion on its side, that is the army that will be victorious. So what about the opposite? What about the complement? Well, let's break it down. The middle two characters are exactly the same. The second character is still army, and then the third character is still must. But now the first character is arrogant. That is the character 骄 for arrogant, often used in modern Mandarin like 骄傲 to talk about someone who has a lot of hubris. And then the last character there, 败, that means lose. So it is saying that the arrogant army, literal translation is arrogant army must lose. And what it means is that the army that is too arrogant, that is the army that will eventually lose the battle. Now, let me also talk a little bit about 骄, arrogant. This character is similar to the character pride or proud. Let me point out something about the English word pride and proud. You can use pride in positive or negative ways. Pride can be rooted in authenticity. That is, you can take pride, justifiably take pride in something that you have accomplished. You can be proud of your child who has done something great through hard work. That's the positive aspect of pride and proud. You can be proud to come from a great family with people you love, with great traditions, and so on. That is also very positive, and this is all rooted in being authentic, rooted in authenticity. That's one side of the yin and yang symbol. What's the other side? The other side would be pride and being proud that is rooted in hubris. That is what degenerates from the positive side of the yin and yang to the negative side of arrogance. It is when proud person, the pride becomes driven by the ego and becomes tainted by the ego. When that happens, you become easily blinded by reality. So on the positive side of being proud, you've got awareness, you've got self-awareness, you are being authentic, and on the negative side, you've got the ego. And this is the context of the right expression. The army that's blinded by the ego, whether it's the ego of individual soldiers or the commander, well, that blindness to reality is what's going to cause the eventual downfall. Okay, so these are the two expressions, and let's talk about exactly how victory or defeat comes about. In war, the side with compassion. This is what happens when you harness the emotion of righteous wrath, like something's wrong and we gotta right the wrong, or we've been oppressed all this time, now we're rising up against the oppressor. You harness those emotions, the emotions of righteous wrath, you channel the emotion into battle readiness. Now, it is something that's consistent and true throughout the Tao practice, that energy, force, power are not to be abused, but rather to be channeled and redirected. So here we see one example where the power of that emotion, righteous wrath, can be channeled for something that is positive, to be ready for battle. Now, that is the side with compassion. Let's talk about the side with arrogance. The arrogant side, being arrogant, is pretty sure of its superiority. Like, we're just, superior beings, and the other side, they look down on the opponent. They're less than human. They are not worthy opponents. They are not really worth our time. We're going to decimate them. We're going to destroy them. And then we're going to go home and laugh about it. So the arrogant side is so sure of its superiority and so sure about the inferiority of its opponents. Happens all the time in war. War is an experience where the enemy is often seen as less than human, subhuman. Happens all the time. And that is one of the ingredients for the failure of the arrogant army. Number two, when you have compassion, when you have emotional energy and power that you channel, your force, your soldiers are unified. Everyone feels the same way. Morale is sky high, incredibly high. Everyone is working together, supporting one another with that unified goal. So what about the arrogant side? And as we talk about this, definitely engage in the mental exercise to map these to life as well. We're going to do that in the next slide, but I think you can already see what's going to happen. So the arrogant army, well, the assumption born of arrogance is that the enemy will be easy to defeat. After all, the enemy are inferior subhuman beings. And therefore, it's not going to take that much effort, right, to defeat them. That's the arrogant assumption. So number three, in battle, the determination on the side that is compassionate, that determination quickly becomes apparent on the battlefield. The soldiers are focused. They are deadly. They are extremely effective. They refuse to give up. This factor alone can multiply the fighting power of an army. It can even overcome numerical superiority. That is, a smaller force can defeat a larger force. It can overcome technology superiority. That is, lesser weapons can win against better weapons, more refined weapons. Morale sometimes makes a huge difference, big enough to overcome disadvantages. On the arrogant side, we can now see that this is what happens when you underestimate the enemy, and this is what Lao Tzu means as well. So number three, surprise and shock on the battlefield. What's going on? Collapse of both offense and defense, that the arrogant assumptions do not prove out upon contact with reality, and therefore things go badly. So now let's bring this into a more practical perspective. What happens when we apply this idea to life? So first of all, we're not talking about enemies anymore. We're talking about challenges. We're talking about the various obstacles that we come across in life. So the side with compassion, you harness the emotional energy of past setbacks and you channel it. Okay, well, we have not done everything perfectly. In life, there are times when we did not succeed, without a doubt. Happens to everybody. But we can use that. Or if you know that your cause is right, your cause is just, you want to see something done right. That is emotional energy that you can harness and channel into doing productive, constructive work. On the arrogant side, The arrogant do not learn from the past. Whatever failures that occurred in the past, well, they must be due to other people. Other people are responsible. They were the ones that messed up. They were the ones that caused you to not succeed in a particular goal. You're not to blame. So this is arrogance talking. Then, number two, just as an army that is highly motivated is unified and morale is sky high, when you have the Tao on your side, every aspect of your being is unified toward the same goal. You accept no excuses, not from yourself or anyone else. Now, let me talk about the different aspects of your being that is unified toward the same goal. And again, let me emphasize that redirecting the energy, channeling the energy, think about Tai Chi. It's all about, those movements are all about redirecting and channeling and transforming the energy of a situation. So in number two, there are three aspects that I want to speak to: the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of a person. All these aspects are unified toward the same goal. Are you unified toward a particular goal? So physically, are you maintaining the level of fitness that'll give you the energy you need to do the work? When you are unified with that same goal physically, you definitely do take care to maintain yourself in great shape. Mentally, you plan things out and prioritize them. Mentally, you are unified toward that same goal, and therefore you are planning things out with the end goal in mind. You plan your work in order to work your plan. So that's the mental aspect. It needs to be brought into a unified whole with the other aspects of yourself. Spiritually, unified spiritually, that means you attain clarity on your purpose. This is not the how, this is not the actual doing. Those will be the physical and mental aspects. This is the why. Why are you engaged in this particular battle? What is the reason for you to be working so hard? Are you doing it for yourself, for material things? Or is it something that you do for your quest? Doing it, making something happen for your quest is not the same as working for material gains. Is it for your sacred journey in life? Does it contribute to that? Does it contribute to your mission? Your mission in life. This is what it means to be spiritually aligned to the same goal. So every aspect of you is unified toward that, mentally, spiritually, physically. What about the arrogant side? Well, the arrogant assumption is that the goal is trivial, it's unimportant, it's easy. Or, even more arrogant, is the assumption that one doesn't need any goals. Goals, well, we shouldn't have any goals at all. This may sound strange when I say it like this, but actually I see this quite a bit. One interpretation of the Tao in the West is exactly this idea that one does not need goals in the Tao. One does not need, for instance, a to-do list. That's actually quite common. It's touted as some advanced form of spirituality. It is not. It is definitely not what Lao Tzu says. Number three, you are determined yet flexible in executing your plan. You accomplish one objective after another. And that's the thing about having a plan and having contingencies already thought out, thought through. You always know what to do. On the arrogant side, arrogance meets with defeat, but the new failure is swept under the rug and the cycle repeats itself all over again. That is, you learn nothing from the experience due to arrogance. And the failure can be blamed on factors other than yourself. And you continue on toward yet another failure in life. It happens, I witness it myself. There are people who live like that day in and day out, oftentimes complaining, never realizing they themselves are the primary factor in the defeats that they experience in life. So finally, let's get right back to the last line of this chapter so that we can conclude our line by line exploration and explanation of this chapter. So here's the conclusion. In life, your actions should be motivated by a greater purpose. So as I talked about in the previous slide, why are you doing this? The side that has compassion is the side that knows why. I'm fighting because I'm protecting what I love. I am going into battle because it's just not right. It needs to be different. Things needs to change. I know the reasons why I fight. So this translates to, in life, actions should be motivated by the greater purpose. What happens when you don't have that? When you lack purpose in life, you're just going through the motions. You're doing what everybody else is doing every day. You're getting up, going to work, you're having a meal, you're coming back, resting, watching television, etc. You're just going through the motions when you don't have purpose. When you do have purpose, when purpose is present, everything you do, every move you make is meaningful. There's a reason for that. I'm doing this because it contributes to the overall goal of getting somewhere in my sacred journey of life. You've got to have that level of spiritual clarity. So finally, here's what Lao Tzu would say if he were with us. Let compassion guide you and lead you to your victories. And remember, compassion, not just being kind to other people, it is also about being able to empathize with the plight of others, being able to understand other people, that things are not easy to them and indeed all around. And there's something that we can do to make things better. Our greater purpose in life is to be of service to humanity. That concludes our line-by-line exploration of chapter 69. We are now ready to go into paraphrase and also the full circle. So the paraphrase of 69, we want to use modern language, modern words, modern expressions to express the meaning that Lao Tzu is trying to convey with this chapter. So we're going to start with section 1. Section 1 begins with a military saying about being the guest instead of the host, and withdrawing instead of advancing. So let me offer one way for us to paraphrase that. When great generals command the army, they prefer to defend from a position of strength and let their enemies extend and exhaust themselves. Instead of charging forward, they back away to draw out hostile forces. We can learn much from them. So that's the first section. It's in a military context, but I think just as you are looking at section 1, you can see how we can apply to life just as we have done with the slides. We then move on to section 2. Section 2 is where Lao Tzu is clarifying the concepts expressed in the saying. So here's the paraphrase that I would like to offer for that. These master strategists follow carefully thought out plans while appearing to have no set plans. They take effective actions while appearing to do very little. They are able to weaken their enemies while appearing to avoid fighting. They use weapons effectively while appearing to not use them much. If we can use the same skillful approach in life, then we too can overcome the most difficult problems while appearing to expend little or no effort at all. So here, when I talk about the master strategists, I am referring to the same great generals that command the army, following the military saying, understanding the wisdom therein. And you can see the connection between all of these different aspects of their command. They are taking effective actions while not seeming to do a whole lot. Well, that's similar to drawing the enemy out, to let the enemy do all the work of coming to you, exposing their weaknesses. And you appear to be backing away, thus avoid fighting, but you're actually doing something. You're allowing the enemy to trip over itself. So you don't necessarily need to use your weapons. You can be using terrain, distance, timing, external environmental conditions to do the work for you. So all of these have real life mapping to suggest how we can handle situations in life. And now the last section is the conclusion. It talks about no greater disaster than underestimating the enemy. And if you were to do that, if you were to be arrogant and underestimate the enemy, it's going to cost you your treasures. Then, to conclude, the side with compassion, that is really the most important thing. So let me offer to paraphrase it in the following way. The worst mistake we can make is to underestimate our challenges. Doing so is a sign of arrogance and will only lead to us wasting our resources and failing miserably. We must also know our purpose. Like the warriors who fight for something greater than themselves, we will be victorious in life when we understand we are here to be of service to the world. So this is summarizing the ideas in the military saying and also the clarifications. We should not underestimate the challenges that we have in life, and we should be clear on exactly why we do what we do. What is the purpose? And let that purpose be driven by compassion. Our compassion to do what is right, our compassion to right the wrongs that we see. Next, so that was our paraphrase, and the last thing that we should do is to bring everything full circle. So what happens in the very last line of the Tao Te Ching, chapter 69? Well, it's actually the most important line of all, talking about how the side with compassion will win. The last line says, compassion leads to victory. So now what we want to do is to link it back to the beginning. link it back to the beginning of this chapter, and be able to see how that forms a greater meaning. So it looks like this, and then we link it back. When we go back to the beginning, we see the military saying. And remember, the military saying is talking about two things. The military saying is talking about preferring to be the guest instead of the host. Then it talks about preferring to withdraw instead of advance. So that's what this is referring to, and then linking it back to the very end, forming the greater meaning, and sometimes, the hidden meaning of a particular chapter. Here, when we form that circle, we see the following meaning. In order to practice compassion, that's the last line, we should back away from contention. That's the military saying, to be the guest or to withdraw. Here's what it tells us. What does it mean to be non-contentious? So the Tao has teachings of non-contention. So when there is contention, the idea is to take a step back, cool off, calm down. This is all about the great generals, the withdrawing from conflict, not at all a weakness, but a sign of true strength. How is that? Another way to say it is that we back away from conflict, not out of fear, not out of cowardice, out of compassion, because of the following. You are strong, you are powerful, and you know it. Based on the certainty of that knowledge, you choose to not use your power for violence. That's why you are compassionate as you back away from conflict. That is the meaning of being spiritually strong. And that spiritual strength comes from spiritual clarity. Your determination, the strength, the mental strength of determination, that comes from knowing what you want to do and why you must do it. And because you have reason for wanting to accomplish your objective, when you do, that is what makes for meaningful victory. So this is how you draw a straight line from getting clear about your purpose in life to attaining that ultimate form of victory. Ultimate victory. Ultimate victory is meaningful victory. It comes from clear purpose. Now, let me say this. The ultimate victory may not look like victory to people because there's no showy domination. There's no victory parade. There's only the feeling that the certainty that you've done exactly what you set out to do. You've done exactly what you wish to accomplish. From that knowledge, there is a profound satisfaction that reaches all the way to your core. That is the reason why the last line is also the most important. The compassionate shall win. Do you possess that spiritual clarity to have the Tao of compassion? And if you do, your victories in life are assured. This brings us to the very end of chapter 69 of the Tao Te Ching. We are now ready to summarize the chapter. Last time, we talked about the first part and we summarized them as life strategies. And what we went through were the 4 tactics or the 4 manifestations, I should say, that Lao Tzu provided in the second section of the chapter, to march without formation. And these are lines that mostly, usually people think of these lines as being very cryptic. Like, what can it possibly mean? What does it mean to march without formation? And as we have seen, and also with the examples that you saw today, a formation is equivalent to a plan, an orderly plan of actions laid out one after the other. It's a plan for you to do things in a specific sequence. So to march without formation is to seemingly have no plan, and yet the appearance is due to the fact that you are so well planned that you can be flexible. And to march without formation is to be able to march and then fall into the appropriate position to handle any situation that develops on the battlefield. So plan out your moves so you can be flexible. And number two, act without arms. In the original, it says to raise arms without arms. That means to achieve your goals without having to force anything, without having to take a whole lot of actions, to accomplish things without needing to engage in a frantic flurry of activities. That's acting without arms. It's one manifestation of what happens when you have a good plan. Number three, grapple without enemies. That is, you are able to influence external factors, other people. And the easiest way to do that is to enlist people to your cause. When they join your cause, they are no longer obstacles, they're not opponents, they're your allies, so that your enemies become non-enemies. And then number four, fight without weapons. In the original, it says to hold weapons without weapons. This is the recognition from compassion that there's no need for violence. There's no need to harm anyone. There's no need to harm anything. That you can accomplish what you want to do simply by applying the Tao. So these are the life strategies that can benefit all of us for an entire lifetime. Let's talk about the summary for the lessons that we went over today. It's all about being victorious in life. So the first major concept that we talked about, and this is reflected in the Chinese in red that you see on the right side of the slide. Whenever you encounter a situation, contentious or not, the advice from Lao Tzu is to take a step back. Do not advance aggressively. Back away with courtesy. Be the polite guest, and you will see how it pays off in so many different situations in life. Number two, never underestimate. Indeed, it is beneficial to oftentimes overestimate so that you are always ready for whatever happens. Treat all of your tasks with the appropriate serious regard. Never take them lightly. Never think that they must be trivial and therefore extremely easy. Number three, live from compassion, from your core essence of compassion. That is, let all of your actions originate from that source to serve, to help, to make things better, easier for other people. That is definitely my motivation in engaging with everyone. That is definitely the reason why I do what I do. It is because I feel the oneness that is at the core of all humanity. I feel the connection that everyone in this meeting has with me. And of course, there's no question that I must do everything I can for everyone's benefit. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.